Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man who thinks a spoonful of sugar does not help the medicine go down, especially when the medicine is feedback. That's right, friends. The former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unclebach, winner of the Rude Award 9 years straight.
That's what my wife always tells me.
Yeah, I know.
Says I won the Root Award. I said there's no competitors at this point.
Yeah, and that's because Garrett that was 100% an accurate intro, because Garrett gives feedback direct and without pulling any punches if you're close to him. If you're not close to him, he'll be very kind to you. And that may sound weird to you, but that is a direct reflection of his time in the teams. And I recently had my wife tell me, look, Garrett says stuff like that, and that's fine, but I don't want you saying that stuff to me, because I gave her some straight feedback, and she was not pleased with that, which kind of amused me, but also I was like, oh, right, yeah, better be careful on that. Anyways, G, what are we doing here today? Well, funny little insight for you friends. This is the second time we've recorded this because I made a mistake and lost the first version. So this should be extra good.
I'm going to hold comments.
Yeah.
Because they're not good for the podcast.
Right. Well, you know, I like that you're holding them publicly. I've got text proof.
I'm just going to focus on what we've got to do here.
We do. We have a podcast to record. So what we're giving you today, we're unlocking endurance for you. We're going to give you the 3 keys to finishing, because we're at the beginning of the year and you're like, what do you mean unlocking endurance? Look, we know everybody's coming out with this renewed sense of optimism. And whether we're talking about just for this year or for your life, like if you're a follower of Jesus, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this podcast, you are, we're called to endurance. The top 2 things that we're compared to in the New Testament is athletes and soldiers. So what do those guys do? They train consistently and always. We're called for a life of endurance. That's really the game that we're playing. So we want to give you the keys, not just for this year, but for all of life. So when I think of endurance, G, you and I have done a few endurance events. We've run a couple 100-milers, which is not something I ever thought I would do.
Got some big things I'm focused on in 2025. I'm okay with the fact that a 100-mile race isn't one of them.
I must have said at least 30 times, no joke, in Q4 of last year, how grateful I was that we were not training for a 100-miler. I told my wife, I was like, I'm so glad we're not doing that, because the amount of time it took is unbelievable. So our very first 100-miler we did in 2022, right at the end in December. And believe it or not, we failed. Garrett made 62 miles. I made it 67. We both failed for one reason, and it was because we just figured, hey, we're just going to show up and knock this thing out of the park. You ran a total of what, like 130 miles in prep?
Yeah, if you go back and listen to the podcast we did on that first run, I think I said it on there. It was around 130 miles.
Yeah, and we came good for the record. When we ran it the next year, we did actually complete it with a lot of lessons learned. But both times we recorded podcasts where we like on the first one, we recorded half of an episode, drove down to where we were going to go, failed, and then as soon as we literally didn't even sleep. We came right in from the failure of the 100-miler and just recorded our reaction to it. And it was like, for the listeners, it was 5 seconds. For us, it was like such a just painful experience that they got to hear the lack of enthusiasm in our voice.
But the point of that story is, Nick and I set out with some goals. We're like, hey, we're going to do this.
And we wanted it so bad.
And we didn't accomplish it. And just because you want it doesn't mean you're going to accomplish it. It's the beginning of 2025 for a lot of you listening to this, or some of you listening to it later, maybe a different year, maybe a different time in the year. But whichever is the case, you've got some things in front of you that you've decided, hey, this is what I want. This is what I want to accomplish. And for us, this is what we want out of 2025. And what we want to talk about today, it's like, hey, it's the beginning of the year. Let's jump right into this and make sure that we can maintain course for the rest of the year, and that we're not going to get to the end of the year and like, oh, man, I tried really hard, but I just didn't meet my goals. I didn't meet my objectives.
Yeah. I mean, when we failed on the first 100-miler, my reason was I thought your wife's cookies was all I needed to make it through. I literally ran like 30 miles just eating cookies. I can't believe that didn't work out for me. And I did so little research on nutrition. It was very predictable to see the pain that I was going to be in, and I had no real running strategy. So other than that, I nailed it. Like, I had a lot of preparation, just not very intelligent preparation. So once again, at the beginning of the year, we want to give you this. We want to give you the keys and the fuel for endurance. Because you go, well, why are you recording this now? Well, here's the thing. It's Monday, January 6th when you're going to hear this. And the 10th of January, only 4 days away, the end of this week, is Quitter's Day. That is the second Friday in January, is on average where they say, research shows that many people abandon their resolutions by then. The second Friday in January every single year. So hopefully that's not a holiday that you're going to be celebrating, but like, we are not about that here. Like, quitting really is just not, it's unacceptable 100%. So
when you quit on things, you set limitations for yourself.
Yeah.
Now, one of my favorite stories is the story of Michael Mansour, Medal of Honor winner. He quit his first time at Butts, and so many people quit in a training like that, and then they don't come back, and they, they're stuck. It is a true statement, but it is not an always true statement that your quit defines you.
Yeah,
for many
good.
people, their quit defines them, right? Like if I'll quit on this, then that means anything that's this hard, again, I'm going to quit on it. For Michael Mansour, that wasn't true. It is somewhat of a belief statement, and the default belief is going to be that what you quit on defines you. If you've quit on some things in the past, that doesn't have to be true for you, but you better be careful of the things that you quit on, because they draw a line in the sand of limitations that you're going to have to come back and surpass if you want more than that.
Yeah, and quitting is basically short-termers disease, because what Garrett and I were talking about some of the things we do in Mighty Men, and we do some very hard challenges in that, and one of them involves carrying a log. And I remember I observed these guys that it would just be so difficult for them that they would have to set the log down and take a break. But you know what the hardest part about carrying a log is? Picking it up. So like there was a small picture of, yeah, you set it down, you gave yourself momentary relief, but now you got to go do the hardest part of it again, and you're actually worse off. And that's quitting in a nutshell. You may be relieving the temporary pain, but you're creating a much bigger pain that you don't even know about, because in the very least, now you have to make sense of why you're a quitter.
So the whole focus of today is you've got some big things that you want for 2025. We're going to talk about how to finish. We're going to talk about how to not quit. What I don't want to have happen to this is, I'm putting this out here, and this is, my inspiration in this episode today is I think about a guy, I was just talking to a friend, and his son is starting first phase of SEAL training today. It's a big day, for first day of first phase for him today. And I remember when I was going through SEAL training, there was a guy in my class, and this will be burned into my brain until the day that I die. It was the week before Hell Week, and our class was a little bit bigger than they wanted it to be. So the instructors were just really on top of us. They were trying to thin the class out a little bit more before we went into Hell Week, because Hell Week takes a lot to run, and you don't want, 90 students in Hell Week at one time. And so they were pushing on our class really hard. And we were in a log PT. Log PT is where you got 6 guys on this. It's a telephone pole, essentially. It's about a 7-foot telephone pole, weighs a little over 200 pounds. And so you can do the math on how much weight each guy's carrying. 6 guys on the log, and they just, they'll send us up and over. A lot of times you're just carrying it in like a chest carry, like 2 arms underneath the log. And you're just, carrying it for miles up and over the berm into the water and back. And it's a couple hours of this. And so in this log PT with my class, the instructors were just pushing on us really, really hard. And there's, for our entire class, there was maybe 13 or 14 total logs, 6 guys on a log at that time. And there's 8 or 9 instructors out there. And so that's less than 1 instructor per log. They're kind of like floating around watching everybody. There's one that's leading the entire thing. But when a student is really struggling, it is like blood in the water for sharks. And this guy in my boat crew was struggling. And so there were 3 instructors at one time on my log, paying attention to us, yelling at us, pushing us, pulling us aside, doing different training with us. It was a really bad situation. And this guy is just giving all the wrong cues, making all the wrong signals, and making some really sad sounds. And the instructors are just crushing him. And so eventually they get him, they're talking to him, yelling at him. They eventually get him to quit. And I remember they get him to quit as like he steps off the log and says he quits, as we were running the log to the water and back. And so like he steps off the log as we're going towards the water. And I remember him just like dropping to his knees, and we can kind of see this whole little episode because we did like kind of a U-turn around him dropping to his knees and just crying and like sobbing, saying, "I wanted this so bad. This was my dream." And I'll remember that for forever. This guy wanted it so bad, but yet he quit on his dreams. And the reason I'm telling that story is because that's not what I want for anyone listening to this podcast, that you could say like, "Oh, I wanted it so bad, but I didn't get it." Just because you want it doesn't mean you can have it. What we're going to talk about is, 1, how to not quit today. Then we're going to talk about what it takes to finish, what it takes to follow through.
Yeah, I love that, man. Every time I've heard that story so many times, and it still hits every time. So, G, let's talk about, why do people quit? Because I think it's easy to focus on how much you want to finish, but if you don't understand some of the pitfalls that are going to cause you to quit, you can be, as we were in our 67 miler or whatever it turned out to be, we were doomed before we began.
Yeah, well, the number one reason that we've talked about on this podcast, and I just want to say this for all the people who listen to this podcast all the time, as I start to give definitions, like I'm going to say, as I start to talk about this, so many of you have heard this before, and I just want to say to those of you that are one of us, that you are a member, that you're a family member of The Impossible Life, that you listen to all these episodes, continue to share this with the people around you, right? You need this episode, I need this episode, and there's people around you that need this episode, and I'm grateful for those of you that what I'm about to say, many of you have heard before, and I'm proud of you that you've committed these things to memory, that it's a part of who you are, that as I start to say these things, it's like, oh yeah, I already know what he's about to say. And one of the primary reasons that people quit is that they're running from pain. We've talked about this before on the show, right? You can live your life basically one of two ways: running towards pleasure or running from pain. I mean, not pleasure, sorry, purpose. When you're running towards purpose or running from pain. And when you're running towards purpose, that's when you have the ability to go so much further than you would go for yourself. When you're running from pain, the analogy that I like to use is like running from a grizzly bear. And if you could actually outrun a grizzly bear, which you can't, they can run about 35 miles an hour. So let's just say, this grizzly's been shot in the leg and he's a little bit slower than normal. And
dude, everything has to be so official with you. It's a hypothetical bear. And
let me tell my story.
It's a hypothetical bear.
Just let me tell my story.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're so exact about animals and
hey, this is a real hypothetical story. Okay?
This really happened.
This is not a fantasy hypothetical
Just kidding,
story.
but seriously.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's say you're running from an injured bear that can't run as fast as you, and he's going to chase you for a couple miles because they're persistent, and especially when they're hungry. And so he's chasing after you. If you can actually outrun the bear, and say you do, and you've run a couple miles, well, for one, you're going to be lost in the middle of the forest, because if you're running on that much fear and adrenaline, you're running from something, you're not really paying attention to where you're going, you're going to be lost. But also you're going to stop running, right? As soon as the thing stops chasing you, as soon as the pain starts to go away, as soon as you get away from that thing that had pushed you, you're not running anymore.
Yeah.
That's running from something. And when you run from something, you'll get lost. And when you run from something, you'll run out of motivation. When you run towards something, that's when you can go further than you would naturally go. And the further out you can set something that you're running towards, you can run longer, you can run further, you can run faster. And that's the power of running towards purpose. But one of the top reasons that people quit is they're running from pain. That's why people quit on their marriage. They're running from pain. That's why people quit on their business. They're running from pain. Now, if you would bring purpose into those situations, that's when you can get through the pain in your marriage. That's when you can get through the pain in your business. So people, I would just say this one reason, right? We're talking first about the reasons people quit before we get on to how to finish. And the reason that people quit is because they're thinking about the wrong things. They're just trying to get away from the pain. And I watched a lot of guys do that in SEAL training.
And you just got a little bit of the unique greatness of Garrett there, in the sense that he said you're either running from pain or running towards purpose. Because a guy I love in Tony Robbins is he'll say people only do things for two reasons. Either they're running from pain or running towards pleasure. But you quite rightly said, the problem with pain and pleasure is that you can both get enough of them. Right, you get to a certain point where it hurts bad enough you have to move. You get to a point where you get enough pleasure you don't want it anymore, and so they're both very temporal sources of fuel. Purpose is eternal. Purpose is the calling card of God, and that never runs out.
You'll run out of fuel running towards pleasure as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, G, what's number two?
Number two, slightly different than running from pain. This is almost kind of a subcategory, but I wanted to highlight it. And this is what I would call running to be loved, or running to be approved, running to be fulfilled, running to be accepted. This was the story that I just previously told of the guy who quit. Now, his father was a Master Chief Navy SEAL, and I didn't realize it as much then. I have a lot more understanding, discernment, looking back at that time, and what I realized what he was back then was a guy who had not been fathered very well. This was a guy, his dad was still active duty. He wanted to be a SEAL so that his dad would love him, accept him, be proud of him. And that's why it was so painful for him to quit. But when you are running to be loved, this is the wrong foundation. And in SEAL training, they're not looking for your reasons. They're just looking for strong men that they can use.
Yeah.
And here's the darkness of running to be loved, of running to be accepted. Here's the weakness of running to be loved and accepted. What you've got inside of you, if you're living this way, or if you're trying to move forward on this, because it's tempting to do it, because it seems like it'll work. It seems like it'll fuel you, like hate fuel, right? You think this will help you for a little while, but actually it's a poor foundation. And when you're running to be loved, you have this whisper inside of you that is saying, like, you're not good enough, you're not going to be loved, you're not accepted. And you're trying to, like, outrun it. Just, if I could just run fast, I could prove it wrong. If I could just do this, then I would feel loved. If I could just do this, then people would accept me. If I could just do this, then whatever that whisper is, you think that you could prove it wrong with your performance. And here's the thing, especially in SEAL training, life is going to make you fail. SEAL training is designed to make you fail. And whenever you fall flat on your back, that whisper is going to be louder than you've ever heard it. And you're going to have lost your shout. You're going to lost your passion in those moments where you get your teeth punched in and you're laying on your back, and you're not going to be able to overcome those situations, right? So that's why, again, this is some of the solution to this is a little bit identity focused, but making sure that you're about the right things, that you're not running from pain, right? Not feeling loved, that is a form of pain, right? And so when you're running that way and you have this whisper, this dark whisper, this wrong, false identity inside of you that's saying you're not good enough, you're not going to be loved, you're not going to be accepted, you're eventually going to quit, because as soon as you go through the valley, as soon as you go through the shadows and the whispers are louder than ever, you're going to believe them.
Yeah, and as somebody what Garrett's describing, a lot of people would say is like an inferiority core belief, because at the basis of that, you don't think that you are really worthy to be loved, so you feel like you have to earn it. And this is going to be the kind of thing where you actually struggle to have any intimacy, like real true intimacy, because you can't really believe that someone would just love you for you. It's a very complex, there's a lot more to that that we aren't going to go into now, but that one is big time identity based, and it's one that unfortunately I've experienced. So G, what's number 3?
So third reason that people quit, their perspective fails, or they have a lack of perspective.
Yeah.
And I saw this, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you've heard me talk about how perspective is my superpower. And I watched a lot of people going through SEAL training just lose perspective. I look at them and I go, oh man, that guy had the character. He had the ability, right? I think he had all of the raw ingredients. But people quit in a moment when they're focusing on the wrong thing, right? When you get really short-term focused, you've heard me say it before, that the secret to making it through SEAL, or the reason that a lot of people quit in SEAL training, is they don't say, like, I could do this right now, right? Like, a lot of guys make it through day one, but then they quit later on, which day one's very difficult. Make it through day one, and then they quit later on because they say, man, I can't do this for 175 more days. I can't. Or you're in the middle of a very difficult exercise. You're like, man, I can't do this for 4 more hours or 8 more hours or whatever it is. When you're in Hell Week, you're like, hey, man, I can't do this for 4 more days, right? The first 4 hours have been insanely terrible. There's no way I could survive until Friday. And the right answer is, I don't have to do this for forever. I just have to do it for right now. And people lose perspective, right? If you go back to, it was either episode 170 or 171, where we just recently talked about this, where I was talking about you've got to take the pain is really loud in the moment, but the pain doesn't last for forever. The reward lasts for forever. And if you'll take that reward over the time frame of forever and compress it into right now, it'll be way louder than the pain.
Right.
But it's just the volume is lower because it's paid out over a very long time.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's how I would explain that people lose perspective. They focus on the wrong things, or they let the wrong things feel too big in the moment, and it causes them to quit.
Yeah, and part of that is how far out you're looking, because what allowed you to do that is before SEAL training, you went in as a guy who knows your story very well, and you said, what would it mean to me if for the rest of my life it's train now and live your life as a champion? It's Muhammad Ali, right? It's looking at what this could mean and really leveraging it to understand this isn't just me quitting on a moment. This is, like you said, you defining your quit. This is you
like
giving up.
It wasn't quitting on, like, a program in the military.
Right.
It was me quitting on my destiny.
Right. And I mean, so, and like, think about that, because a lot of guys quit and didn't realize. I mean, we talked about the existential crisis of having to go look yourself in the mirror and being like, I'm nothing of who I thought I was. And I said to you, I was like, I wonder what happened to some of those guys that you've told me the quitting stories, because man, you talk about having to go deal with some difficult stuff. That is a tough one to deal with. But they probably never thought about it in the moment, or beforehand, which is why when they got to the moment, once the moment started screaming louder than the long term, it was over.
They thought just because they wanted it really bad.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Until it hurts so bad that you don't want it anymore. And again, that's the power of it being something bigger than you.
Yeah.
And I didn't look at my destiny as like this is what I want.
Yeah.
My destiny was what God put me here to do, which was not about me, which was serving other people. And so me quitting wasn't about me, quitting on what I wanted. If I was quitting on all these people who needed me that I was called to serve.
Yeah, and you grew up, this is part of the infinite potential unlock. God has a purpose for your life, and you can have anything you want if you're willing to pay the price. You had the strong belief that you were supposed to be there.
You can kind of mix my parents' quote with Charlie Kirk's quote. I've done this before, and I think it's funny to say it this way. Charlie Kirk says there is a God, and he's not you.
Right.
Right. And I would say, my parents always told me God has a plan for your life. I would say, well, God has a purpose for your life, and it's not about you.
Right.
Right.
And we're still freshly in the glow of the New Year's Day fire starter, and then also the fast track we did with people afterwards, where we helped them plan their year in a very strategic framework that we've developed, which was a lot of fun. And one of the things that you said to everybody before we got in the water, it was 35 degrees. It wasn't nearly as hard as it was last year.
It was cold this year. It was and we stayed in. If you're, some people asked me afterwards if you were at the event and you're curious how long we stayed in the water. We stayed in for about 5 minutes. Last year, the water was a little bit colder. We did like 3.5 minutes last year.
I think we did like 2.5 or 3, bro.
One of our friends came up to me and he said, "Is this like in football where the coach says you guys are going to do push-ups until I get tired?"
Right. Yeah. People
guys,
think you don't get cold. That was what made me laugh. Is people are like, "Why are you shivering?" I'm like, "Guys, he's human. Like he's not like his heart didn't die. I just joke that it did. He's still got feeling." But,
my superpower is I can shiver longer than you.
Yeah, no, that's a legit thing. Garrett is really willing to go to like miserable depths, and like he gets stronger.
The cold just doesn't. I think I've spent so much time with it that it's just not.
Yeah, but dude, no, it's not just the cold. The more miserable things get, you do get better. I've been there with you, and I'm like, yeah. Anyways, that's a whole side version. But the point I was making about that is, you said to people when we were out there, you said, "Hey, every time I was getting ready to rush into a building, and I knew those guys knew we were coming, and they were hopped up on whatever they'd been injected with, and they had machine guns, I would just tell myself, I'm supposed to be here." And that's such a powerful belief, to be like, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And I just,
because fear sounds like is, what are you doing here?
Yes.
Right. You need to get up and run from this place.
Yeah.
And it is that's a passive thought. An active thought is, I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Right. Like I was speaking it internally. I was speaking it to my flesh. I was speaking it to my subconscious. I'm supposed to be here.
Yeah.
Right. Where all of the natural is saying, you got to get out of the water. You got to get out of the danger. Don't jump out of the plane. My supernatural, the spirit that's in me, the intentional side of me says, no, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be.
I love that. And then we said that to everybody and said, okay, let's go get cold.
So let's go to number 4.
Let's do it. We experienced
number 4.
This
and again, these are just the reasons to quit. We're talking about the reasons to quit. Then we're going to talk about how to finish, because I want you to finish your year strong and accomplish everything that you've set out to do this year. Number 4, great evidence story for this one is us. Number 4 is lack of prep, right? Lack of preparation. You're going to quit with a lack of preparation. You're going to fail with a lack of preparation. And that's what happened to Nick and I in our the first 100-mile run. We tried to get out there with very little prep, or at least I did. Nick prepared a little bit harder than I did. I had a friend just say, "Hey, I want you to come do this with me." And I was like, all right.
Yeah. And I started down the long and dangerous road of being like, well, Garrett, if you're going, I'll go. And
that's a dangerous road for sure.
It is. I've had a knife blade in my arm, which was my own doing, but I've had basically it's been a lot of painful experiences. But you told me once that you'll give me a nickel of credit and say that I've gotten a little tougher. So huzzah, I'll take it.
For sure.
Yeah. So lack of preparation, and we all know what that looks like. For you right now, that probably looks like, hey, I'll just make it a good year. No, you need to stop and like spend some time actually realizing what just happened in 2024 and what your lessons were, so you can apply them to 2025.
Which takes us kind of right into the prerequisites for this episode that I want to make sure we cover. A lot of times we'll talk about, before we get into the meat of this, is like, what are the prerequisites? One of the prerequisites, I'm assuming that you have a plan. For those of you that joined us in the fast track, hey, you've got a plan.
Yeah.
And I said to you guys there, we're gonna cover some great stuff today. You're gonna get some good curriculum and teaching from Nick and I. But the most valuable thing that's gonna happen today is you spending this much time preparing for what you want out of 2025. Right? If you would just take an entire day and say, I'm going to focus all of today for what I want out of the rest of this year, that's a little bit of the Abraham Lincoln philosophy of taking time to sharpen your axe. Right? But the flip side of that is, if you take 5 minutes to write down your goals, you're not going to be very invested in those goals. So if you only spend 5 minutes writing them down, you'll quit on them in the next 10 minutes. Right? So you need to make some of that investment. So one of the prerequisites for today's episode is that you have already made a plan. I'm assuming that you've got something that you're saying, man, this is what I want. This is what I've I've spent time thinking about it. I've been very intentional and strategic, and I've determined these are the goals that I want out of 2025. And when you have that, then what we're about to talk about, these are the things that you need to have with those goals to make sure that you finish them, because it's not just about wanting it.
Yeah, and the encouragement for you is that your plan doesn't have to be perfect. You guys had the saying in the SEAL teams, G, that no plan survives first contact. And the great philosopher Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face, right?
100%.
And so it's like, don't think that, like, yes, you need to have a good plan and you need to spend time on it, because like Garrett said, easy come, easy go. If you spend 5 minutes, it'll take 5 minutes to go out the window. But don't feel like, oh, if I don't get the plan perfect, I'm going to be in trouble. Your plan is going to be a intentionality of setting out, and you're going to adjust, and you're going to make sure that you're paying attention. And then the second thing that you need to do is you need to count the cost. So you need to have a plan. You need to count the cost. And I've got a friend who's very successful in business, and I always tell this to people. He started, built, scaled, and sold multiple companies. And he has a saying. He says, twice as much and twice as long. And he says that to people.
That's so encouraging.
It's super encouraging. Hey, you know how you just spent all this time and you put a timeline and you made all these estimates for how much money you need? It's going to cost twice that and take twice as long.
And that's been true for us with the Impossible Life.
It has.
Right?
Yeah.
Nick and I have not hit one goal that we have written, but if you were at the Fast Track, you know how I really the way that I look at goals. I don't look at goals as like a, hey, I have to hit this thing. I look at it like a target and think like an archery target, right? An archery target has a tiny little crosshair in the middle that you're trying to hit with the arrow, and then you've still got like the red bullseye around that, and then you've got like the yellow ring around that, and that's still pretty good if I'm in the yellow ring.
Right.
And Nick and I have not, shot the wings off of the fly on any of the goals that we've had in the last couple of years with the Impossible Life.
Right.
But we have scored very well on every single target, right? And so when you shoot at an archery target, if you put the tip of the blade in the middle of the crosshairs, yeah, you scored a 100. But if you put it in the red, right, like put it in the red, that's a kill shot, right? Like, I mean, you're within inches of a perfect score. You're still just in the 90s, right? So, hey, great. Nick and I have scored in the 80s and 90s on a lot of our goals, and that's why I like to call them targets, because, hey, this is what I'm trying to shoot. And, if you have a goal this year to save $50,000 and you save $47,000, good for you, man. Right. You did it.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're going to get it in January.
Right.
Right. Like you did what you set out to do. Maybe you had some little setbacks. You didn't quit along the way. If you were only at 47, at the 47,000 at the end of the year, maybe you were only at 25 by September and you had some setbacks and you said, I'm going to make it happen anyways. And you really pushed through. Right. So scoring, 95 out of 100 is still doing great. And that's why I like to look at goals as targets.
Yeah. I really hope that's encouraging for you guys. Okay. So G, we've talked about some of the prereqs, and we are ready to now give the 3 keys to finishing.
So 3 keys to finishing. And I'm going to say this really quick for those of you. There's some of you, and it always encourages me when I hear it. There's some of you who've written in or told us. You can always, if you don't know, you can always reach us at info@theimpossible.life. Some of you have written in, or some of you have told us in person that, like you use this podcast for like your homeschool curriculum, or you use it for a small group, or you use it for like a teaching lesson. Nick and I love to hear that, and that is part of what we want this podcast to accomplish, is to speak into people's lives, and not just for you, but to equip you to go out and help other people. And for those of you, so I'm just giving you some of the deeper notes that won't necessarily be talked about. I'll let you guys connect the dots. But for those of you who do like take detailed notes, and you're going to turn this into coaching, you're going to turn this into programming, the 4 reasons that we talked about of why people quit, well, you can connect the 3 ways to finish to, I won't tell you which ones they are. I'll let you kind of figure that out on your own, and maybe some discussion questions for your group. But you can connect these 3 keys to finishing as the solution to the 4 reasons that people quit that we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, and what Garrett said about people reaching out, I mean, I think, this is not something, Garrett and I aren't doing this to be famous or because of anything other than the fact that we know that God's put us together for a reason. So someone was saying to me actually over the weekend, they were saying, man, the podcast they were talking about, they're like, you probably get sick of hearing this. And I said to him, I was like, you know what, man, it is always so encouraging and such a blessing, not because I'm like, wow, look how great we are. I am always just like, Lord, it is amazing that you're using this the way that you do. It's such a pleasure, and we're always honored to play our part. And so to hear that kind of feedback is amazing, but to also get to know some of you, like the people that are in our Mindset Mastery and the various programs that we do, we get to know you better. We get to go deeper with you. Some of those stories Garrett told about people who have like a men's group around this, or they're using it as part of their school curriculum. We hear those stories, not just from email, but because when we're on these programs, we have a lot of discussion. We get to know the people on there, and we get to, I don't know if it's always going to be like that, but right now we're getting to know a lot of the people.
So when you hear us call out guys like our man Norm, or people like Alex, who I just got to meet at our fast track. I mean, tell Alex a story real quick.
Alex, man, shout out to Alex in Alabama. His family was flying back to going home to Europe for New Year's, and he was on his own. He discovered our podcast on Spotify like a week earlier.
So awesome.
He heard an ad. It was like, oh, I'll go check that out. Listened to it. Heard us talking about New Year's Day fast track, and was like, you know what? I was just going to be sat here on my own. I'm going to come join you. So next thing you know, he's driving out to Dallas, shows up. We go out to lunch together. We then, he comes and shivers with us in the morning, spends all day just planning his year. I actually shot him an email, just letting him know it was so great to meet him, and we're talking on there. But I just love that. Like that's the power of somebody who's like, I'm just going to take action on this right now.
If you want to get called out on the podcast, join us.
We're selling shout outs. No, we're not. It's just we're very cognizant of what's happening, and it's just like we said, Garrett has trained me. Anytime someone thanks me for anything, I just go, I'm honored to play my part, because truthfully, that's all we're doing. We're just being stewards of what God's given us.
So let's jump into 3 keys to finishing here. Number 1, if you're part of us in Mighty Men, and there's a lot of ways to connect with us, be a part of us. If you're a part of us in Mighty Men, you've heard this one before. Number 1 is hold fast. Right? This is an old Navy thing. Like old sailors would have hold fast tattooed on their knuckles. Right? Being tough guy, got hold fast. They'd put their knuckles together, and you can read hold fast across the front of their knuckles. And what hold fast is about, it's not like, hey, I need to hold on to the ship so I don't get washed off. Quite the opposite. Hold fast is I'm the thing that's standing in between this ship sinking and this ship making it across the ocean. If there's holes in the ship, I'm going to plug them. Right? If the ship needs to get back on track, I'm the one that's going to be changing the course. I'm the one that's going to be tightening the ropes. I'm the one who's going to be restretching or sewing up the sails in modern ships. I'm going to be the one who's moving equipment. I'm going to be the one who's refueling this. I'm going to be the one who's watching the gauges. The ship does not sail itself. It's not a Tesla, right? It is an old ship is a piece of wood and rope and linen, and these guys trusted their lives to it, right? It was the thing that was carrying them to their destiny. And see that in your life as like, what is your ship, right? It's your family, it's your business, it's the things that you're trusting your life to. Would you fall asleep on a ship in the middle of the ocean for days and just let it do whatever it wanted to do? I hope not, unless you want to die. If you want your ship to get across the ocean, you're going to have to stay on top of it. You're going to have to hold fast to the ship. And what that means is that you're not letting go of it. You're paying attention to it. I'm going to stay on top of this thing. And if you want your goals to be accomplished at the end of the year, if you want to check off these boxes, if you want to score high on your targets, then you're going to have this mindset. We're like, man, I'm going to stay after this thing all year long. And there's really kind of like a 2-part mindset to this. Because think about an old English ship, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and there's a captain for the ship, and the captain has a wheel, right? Like he's just standing back there in his fancy hat, holding the wheel, and he's got his guys next to him telling him what to do, but he's just holding the wheel, saying where he wants it to go. That's really easy to do, and we get to play both like captain and sailor in our life, right? Like, hey, I'm going to steer the ship where I want it to go, but then you also get to be the sailor that actually makes it happen, right? The reason that wheel, when the captain turns the wheel that the ship turns, is only because the sailors are doing their part.
Right.
If the sailors weren't doing their part, that captain would turn the wheel and nothing would happen. Right. So that's the power of us holding fast. And I want to break this kind of into like really 2 pieces. There is, if you're trying to cross the Atlantic Ocean, if you're trying to cross the Pacific Ocean, right, you set a course, but then it's going to take 4 months, 6 months to cross the ocean. And it's not like, oh, well, let's go over here, let's go over there, right? Like you're going to have to set a solid course to make it across that journey. And that's really the endurance part of Hold Fast. When I preach this message in Mighty Men, that's really what like Hold Fast is about. And there's multiple scriptures in the Bible. I won't jump into that now, or else I would go really long. There's multiple scriptures in the Bible about hold fast, about staying tight, drawing after God. It's the Hebrew word debak. But again, I won't go deep into it. But endurance is this ability, comes from some of my other favorite scriptures, like James 1:12. Endurance is this ability to stay under the weight. It's the hippomone. We just talked about this at Mighty Men this past weekend, and I was talking about one of the activities in SEAL training that's so difficult, which is running with boats on heads. Imagine this, little inflatable boat that weighs about 200 pounds, and that's with no water or sand in it. And think about how many times you take it through the surf. It has so much water and sand in it. You'll dump it, but like water and sand just continues to accrue in there. So it weighs more than 200 pounds. And you're running with this thing on your head. There's only 6 guys underneath it, and it's bouncing off the top of your head. Think about it. It's inflatable, right? If it was like a sandbag, it would just like stay tight on your head. But because it's inflated tight, it's just bouncing off of your head. And I talked about one of the worst things that you could be called in SEAL training is a boat ducker. These are people who, like, we're all supposed to be carrying the weight of this thing, and these are guys who are just looking down at the ground, that they're not keeping their neck and their shoulders strong, and their head isn't pressing up against the boat. And they may look like they're close to touching the boat, but the boat's just bouncing off their head. They're not actually carrying any of the weight. The only way that you could actually carry the weight of the boat is you're like trying to if you've ever stood up under, your parents say like, hey, don't do that, you're going to hurt yourself. But if you've ever like stood up underneath something and like tried to pick it up with your head, like trying to raise the ceiling, or if you've put a house together, I'm sure you've put a few stacks of plywood on your head before and tried to stand them up to your friend. Right, if you're in construction, you know what I'm talking about. Right, when you try to pick something up with your head, like, it's a very specific feeling, and it's like loading all of the weight on your spine. It does not feel good, and you're like having to press with your spine. And only if you have that feeling are you really carrying the weight of the boat. It's not just being under the boat. It's not just like touching your head to it, like, hey guys, I'm here with you. No, you're not. Right, you're only in it if you're like pressing up hard with your head. And this is the Greek word hypomone, which is about endurance, right? To stay under the weight. And God says that this leads to our maturity. This leads to his glory. This leads to our greatness when we decide like, hey, I'm going to stay under the weight. And you're going to have this mindset. You're going to have this mentality if you want to accomplish your goals this year, because there's going to be times like, for example, when we would go up over the berms with the boats and then come back down, depending on which position you were in, that boat got really heavy.
Oh, yeah. That makes
right?
sense.
Like when you were going up, if you're in the back, you got a lot more than your share. When we would come down over the berm and the boat's pointed downhill and you're in one of the front positions, you got a lot more than your share. And there's going to be times where you're just going to have to stay strong. May not be fair, may be a difficult season, whatever it is. You come up with your own situation, but there's going to be times where it's heavier than it's supposed to be. And you got to be someone who's going to press back, who's going to stand up tall underneath the weight. And so that's one piece of the hold fast. The other piece of the hold fast, little jab at my brother Nick here, you got to make sure that you're going to stay tight and on top of the little things, right? The sailors weren't just like, oh, man, I'm going to stand out here and be like sailor guy. And like, the winds and the waves, they don't hurt me. Like, I'm tough guy. Well, that's part of it, right? You do need to be tough. You got to be able to stand up to the waves and the weather, but you got to also actually be able to tie your knots correctly, right? If you get up there like, oh yeah, I'll do it. I'm not afraid to climb up to the top of the sails. Like, I'm not afraid of the heights. I'm not afraid of the wind and the waves, but you get up there and you tie a bad knot. Well, it doesn't matter. You've ruined it, right? The sail's going to come down. We're not going to get where we're supposed to go. And so hold fast is a combination of both endurance, but discipline in the little things. And just one other piece I'll add to this equation, because I'm kind of given like all the little formula underneath, really just this understanding of hold fast, which is one of the keys to accomplishing your goals, is there's an episode on our podcast that I highly encourage you to jump back to, which is a shout out to Norm. Norm's favorite episode. He tells us all the time it's my favorite episode.
We love Norm.
It's time frame orientation, right? Time frame orientation is understanding that you live what time frame are you oriented towards? Or orientation is like, are you pointed north, or are you pointed south, or are you pointed east, or are you pointed west? Well, a time frame orientation is your life pointed towards tomorrow. Is your life pointed towards next month? Is your life pointed towards next year? Is your life pointed towards 20 years from now? Is your life pointed towards eternity? And the orientation, the time frame scale that you're living your life on, you will make very different decisions. If I told you to make as much money as you could in the next 24 hours, you'd go knock on doors.
Yeah.
Right? If I told you to make as much money as you could in the next 20 years, you wouldn't probably start by just knocking on doors.
Right. Very
right?
good.
Different activities based upon what the time frame orientation is. Right? And so that's a piece of hold fast.
Yeah, I love that, man. And then you talked about, like, you still have to have, like you said, the discipline and the little things to do the right thing in the moment and to choose, hey, I'm going to look at the long term.
Can't slack off when you're tired.
That's exactly right. And that was a very direct statement that Garrett's speaking to something that I'm just going to go ahead and pass on because I'm developing more equanimity. Okay, G, what is the second key?
Right. So number one is hold fast. Number two is vision. Right. And there's a lot to this. So like, I'm just kind of titling the second key vision. And again, if you're taking the deep notes, if you're one of our small groups, if you're one of our homeschool groups, remember that you can connect these keys back to these keys are solutions to the 4 reasons to quit. But number 2 is vision. And really what this is about is having a bigger picture of what you're about and a longer term future. It's really knowing why you're doing something. And for me, like that vision was for me in SEAL training was like, hey, this is my destiny. It's not about just this moment. It's not just about me wanting to be in this military group. It's about like, man, everything in my life hinges on this. And it's not just for what I want. It's for what God's called me to do, for the people that God's called me to serve. You've got to, like Simon Sinek says, great book, start with why, right? You've got to know why you're doing what you're doing. But another piece of vision is the beliefs portion. And, again, jump into Mindset Mastery with us. If you want to know some of these things deeper, right? Like we talk about beliefs. We have a whole episode on beliefs. We do a whole month on beliefs in Mindset Mastery. And again, this is one of those ones, like I said, that when I say, here's what the definition of beliefs is, for some of you that have been around with us for a long time, I hope you're starting to get to the place where you know what I'm about to say before I say it, right? The definition of beliefs are these things that I know are true, but cannot prove. And I mean prove in a scientific standpoint. This is verifiable, demonstratable, repeatable, right? Like that's what it means. You know, science is losing, the idea of science is losing its credibility, but by the definition of science, it should not. If things are verifiable, demonstratable, and repeatable, that's what actual science is. People just call things that aren't that. They call them science, and that's why science is losing its credibility. Yeah. But if it's verifiable, demonstratable, and repeatable, that is something that you can prove. And there are many things in my life that I know are true. Again, the definition of beliefs, the things you know are true but can't prove. There are many things in my life that I know are true, but I can't necessarily scientifically prove it to you. I cannot scientifically prove to you the existence of God. Now, shout out to, man, I missed it on this one. There's a great guy, Wesley Huff. I wanted to have him on our podcast, and then he was on Joe Rogan. His episode hasn't come out yet. He's a great guy that can give you pretty much all of the evidence and really close to the proof that God is real. But we cannot scientifically prove that God is real. But I know it's true, and I can give you evidence, not just evidence external, but evidence in my own life of how real God is. Right. And so that's a core belief for me. It's a core belief for me that God has a great plan for my life. I can't scientifically prove that to you, but I know it's true. I have a core belief that I can have anything that I want that I'm willing to pay the price for. That, like Henry Ford said, that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. That is a core belief for me. And that is something I know is true. I just can't scientifically prove it to you. The things that you believe are going to help support your why. Right? When you know who you are, when you know what God's put you on the earth to do, and you know why you're here, that's going to help you maintain. That's going to help you finish your objectives. And it's going to help keep you focused on the things that aren't you. Yeah. If you don't have a big vision and you don't know your why, you will quit as soon as it does not seem exciting. You will quit as soon as you don't think it's going to pay off as well as you thought it would before. That's why a lot of people, this whole Quitter's Day deal. Yeah. Quitter's Day is when people quit when they think they can't score 100 anymore. Yeah. Right. And if your life depends on it more than your life, your family's life depends on it, if they tell you you're not going to score 100 anymore, you're going to be like, fine, I'll do extra credit, whatever it takes. Yeah. Like, I'm going to get back there. I have to do this because it's more important than just what I want. Yeah. And so vision really cures this like selfishness portion of quitting. Yeah. And I wanted to interrupt you there, G, because vision, the way Garrett and I talk about vision, everyone has, if you say, what's your vision? Some people, it'll be like, I cut out a poster board with like, I put a car on there, like those vision boards that we see. I'll tell you, the way we talk about vision is very different. If you have one of those, it's okay. That's like your big dreams, but vision's a lot bigger than that. And what I'll say is like vision grows like a muscle. You learn it progressively. I was searching through my notes actually, G, as I was reviewing some of my end of year and preparing myself for 2025. And I found an old quote from you, which I feel like I have a good antenna for whenever Garrett drops a good quote. That. And he said, vision is a possibility that you believe must become a reality. And I love that because the term, when it's a possibility, this is what I mean. You get repetition. Maybe some people, they can't think past a month ahead of them. Other people, like what we did in our fast track, we help them think a year. As you grow your vision muscle, you're going to be able to look further and further down the road. And the further down that you look, the more compelling that it becomes. You with the SEAL teams, the story we already shared. There's a key piece that you've got to catch in that line. must become a reality. Right. It's very different than can become a reality, should become a reality, want to become a reality, need to become a reality. Must is this word that when they would give us missions in the military, they would say, you must do this. Right. They didn't say, we want you to do this. They didn't say, can you do this? They didn't say, you should do this. They didn't say, we need you to do this. They say, you must do this. And this implies, right, must implies mission. Must implies duty, right? This is like what you're for. This is what you're about. And this is bigger than you, right? Must, like when they would say, you must protect this, you must capture this person, you must rescue this person. We took that as that thing, that requirement is more important than us.
Yeah, I love that, man.
And that's scripture, that Jesus did not come to be served, but to serve, right? He knew what was required of him.
Yeah, very good. Now, you talked about that. Now, we're talking very much in long-term, G, but you also said when we were prepping for this, there's some short-term disciplines.
So the other side of, like, in this vision and beliefs category is one thing I want to add to it. Again, there's a lot of little ingredients inside the big key. One thing I want to add to it is what I would call just taking, like, your motivational showers, right? When you stink, you know what you're supposed to do.
Right.
When you're hungry, you know what you're supposed to do. When you have to go to the bathroom, you know what you're supposed to do. And when you're not feeling motivated, do you know what you're supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right? I know if I want to work out, but I don't feel like working out and the schedule says work out, I know what I need to do to get in a place where I feel like working out more, right? If there's tasks that I don't feel like doing in my business, I know what to do to get myself into a place where I feel like doing those things. And we have different types of fuel, right? Like a lot of this podcast is, it's inspiration. I'm going to help you think bigger. I'm going to help you think further down the road. But also, I know listening to this podcast, for many of you, for me, when you listen to it, it's like, okay, man, I'm getting excited now. I'm getting fired up. This makes me want to go to the gym, right? You might have your music, whatever you like to do, but you've got to learn, what are these little things that I need to do to help me get me into the right place mentally, to help get me into the right place emotionally. Don't think, just like when you're sprinting, right? When I go out and sprint, right, I do sprint training, I'm going to deplete all of my glycogen. I better have like a few carbs before I do that. And I'm going to have to give myself some carbs during, and I'm going to have to give myself a little bit of carbs afterwards, right? I can't go sprint without glycogen. When you run out of glycogen, you're like half speed, right? You just don't have the same fuel. And in that same way, you've got to balance these different fuel sources in your life. And don't think that you're going to get out there and like thinking that you don't need motivation would be thinking like, I'm going to not eat any food and not take any supplements and just go to the track and have an all-star performance. Yeah. You're silly if you think that you're going to go through the rest of this year and be like, oh, I don't need to be motivated. I'm just like going to be like disciplined. Yeah. Right. There's nothing wrong with motivation. You just need to know how to get yourself motivated and learn how to motivate yourself. Right. I know how to activate myself.
It was the great Jim Rohn that said, people say motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does showering. And that's why we say you should do it daily.
Exactly.
And that sums it up perfectly. This is what Garrett just said is such a key to self-leadership and to really unlocking the greatness inside you, is learning how to be a great encourager of yourself and down to the prescriptive. Like I know I've shared it on this podcast many times, G, I know if I'm struggling physically because I slept bad or I've got a lot on or whatever, 2-mile run. If I go for a 2-mile run, it energizes me. It doesn't deplete me. If I go over that, it depletes me. And like, I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back. I'm just saying you should have a level of knowledge of yourself that you have a playbook that, okay, this happened. This is what I do to get myself where I need to go. Don't decide or wait until the moment happens. Learn from what's happening repeatedly in your life and develop a playbook. What's number 3, G?
So number 3. So we've talked about hold fast. We've talked about vision and all the little ingredients that go underneath both of those things. And then number 3, we're going to call this key preparation. It is all about preparation. Yeah. Every mission that I went on in the military, we didn't just like prepare for like, all right, here's the tools that we're going to need. Right. Oh, like, okay, I'm going to have to walk in 5K. Okay, make sure I wear the right shoes. We didn't just prepare for what we knew was going to happen. We prepared for all of the worst things that could happen. One helicopter goes down. Okay, here's what we're going to do. One guy gets shot. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Enemy is not on the target that he was supposed to be in. We find out he's somewhere else. Okay, here's how we're going to respond to that. We had already determined what we were going to do when the worst things happen and how we would still succeed. And this is you having the mindset of like, man, this year, this is what I want to accomplish. And here's like my great plan of how it's going to go all beautiful and pretty. But when that doesn't happen, here's what I'll do anyways. And when I don't get the promotion that I wanted, here's how I'm going to save anyways. Yeah, so right? Good. I know how I'm going to meet my goals regardless of if I get like the dreamy situation or not. Yeah. Whether I get good weather or not, I'm going to shoot a great game. Yeah. Right. This is You know, I grew up with a dad. I've talked about him this way before, and so honored. Multiple people text me and said things like my friend Jamie did to me. He said, I'd like to submit my application for adoption after listening to my dad preach this last Sunday. He talked about some of the greatest decisions that he's made in his life, and so much of them were about being a great father and being a great parent.
It was wonderful.
You can go listen to that on YouTube.
Elevate Life Church's YouTube in Frisco, Texas. We'll have it.
Yeah, my dad Scott, who's been on.
I'll link to it in the show notes. How's
okay,
that?
great,
Yeah.
awesome. But I grew up with a dad who, you know, before we went on a road trip, we used to go to, as kids, we used to go to Colorado every year. Like that was one of the road trips I remember because it was a longer road trip. And every time before we'd go on the road trip, I remember the week of, like my dad getting his oil change and he'd always be like, man, we got to get new tires on the car. Like we're not going to go drive through the ice on slicks. And he'd make sure that he had straps, and he'd make sure that he had, you know, changed the tire equipment. Like he'd make sure, like, I've got all the things that I need. I got a can of Fix-A-Flat, right? If you do not prepare that way, like my dad always did that stuff. And we rarely ever had anything happen to us. And most of the time he ended up just helping other people who were not prepared. But if you don't do that, here's what's going to happen to you. You'll be in the middle of New Mexico where you are 100 miles from help. You're 100 miles from the closest gas station, and you don't have a Fix-A-Flat. You ain't got a wrench. You ain't got nothing, and you're just stuck. And that's what's going to happen to you if you do not have a preparation mindset for this year of what are the things that I need to bring with me so that even when it goes bad, I'm still going to succeed.
Man, I feel convicted. So I'm going to have a confession at this point on the podcast, specifically to your dad, because you talked about your dad, then you gave a very specific scenario.
Well, you're going to hear about this.
Yeah, sure. I know I am. But at this point, I just expect it. So last year when we went to Mighty Men Camp, which is like 4 hours away for us, and we drive down there, I drive my truck every year. I take a group full of men in my truck. It's a great time to spend together. And I got a flat tire, and I'm one of the leaders in there. And I showed up late. And your dad was like, what happened? I was like, oh, I got a flat. And he just looked at me and he said, don't let it happen again. I was like, yes, sir.
Zero sympathy.
Right, no sympathy. Now, you may be going, well, you can't control a flat.
Yeah, because my dad's thinking like, well, if I had a flat, it only would have slowed me down
I was
about
like
15 minutes.
And I was an hour and a half late. And what I didn't have the guts to tell him at the time, and Pops, I know you're going to you can say whatever you want once you hear this, because I know you're listening. The reason I was so delayed was I couldn't swap for my spare because I had gotten wheels put on my truck.
Rookie move.
Which meant I had
hey guys, I got these cool shiny wheels.
Look, my wheels look great on my truck.
Usefulness and utility went backwards, but I look cool.
Yeah, because I didn't get a tire jack for those lug nuts. And so we went to go swap, and we're like, oh, this doesn't fit. So I had to drive it on the rim to some podunk tire place where, I mean, these guys fixed it, but that's why it took us so long. And they had to rebalance the tire and all that. It would have been, like you said, a 10-minute job. I had 4 guys to help me. So
let me say to you what my dad would say. Well, Nick, what did you learn?
Yeah, well, trust me. You know what I did as soon as I got back? I ordered a new jack, and I made sure to test it. So, Pops, I'm self-correcting at this point. Maybe you're doing a few things right.
So preparation is number one. It's like, again, this is the third key of how to make sure that you get what you want out of this year, that you accomplish your goals, that you hit your targets, right? We talked about hold fast. We talked about vision. And with preparation, the first part is you just realizing like, hey, your plan, it's a great plan, not going to happen that way.
Right.
Bad things are going to happen to you. You're going to get sidelined.
Yeah.
You're going to get sideswiped. You can't have the expectation that your year is just going to go perfectly, and that's the only way that you're going to meet your goals. You'll never meet your goals if you have an expectation that every day is going to go perfectly. So prepare accordingly. What's your Fix-A-Flat for your goals, right? Like look at each one of your goals and maybe just think about that, or like write a line underneath there. Like what's my Fix-A-Flat for this goal? Right. And then the other thing I would say is, as a part of preparation, is what we talked about in the military called segmentation. You've got to look at your year. Like say you want to save $50,000 this year. Great. That's over $4,000 a month. That's not just what do I need to do to say, okay, $4,000 a month. Most people would say like, you know, if you have a typical job, you get paid twice a month. You're like, okay, here's what I need to save this much each paycheck. Great. Right. And that's like level 1 segmentation.
Right.
Here's what I would say is like high level segmentation. What do I need to do every single day to maintain this goal? Right. And what you need to do every single day, that doesn't mean like what's $4,500 divided by 31. That's not what I'm saying. Right. Like I'm not saying like make little tiny deposits from a bank account every day. What are the things that I need to think about every single day to make sure that nothing can stop this goal? What are the things that I need to be focused on?
Yeah,
so I need to be focused on my budget. I need to be tracking my income. I need to be looking for, maybe I need to set aside more than I thought I did because I'm also trying to, I got to be prepared for any expenses or anything like that that could take away from my goal. So thinking of when you get the segmentation with the Fix-A-Flat, that's when you're going to realize, okay, here's how I make sure that I do not get taken off track by some storm wind.
Yeah, it's so key. I mean, that's one of the Navy SEAL Big Four. And it also encourages you. If you think like, hey, I have to put on or I have to save $50,000, you're going to start looking at the size of that goal and get really discouraged. Whereas if you're just like, hey, I just got to put X aside this week, that's a lot more encouraging. And then, we talked about you hit the training, the progressive mind, and just that whole mindset.
You've got to realize, like, okay, so let's just talk. This is an analogy I use with the guys in the fast track. If you've got a 10-year goal, right? Let's talk about what your 10-year goal is. Well, your 10-year goal may not happen, 10% each year, right?
Yeah.
Like after year one of a 10-year goal, you may not be 10% of the way there. You may be 2% of the way there. After year 5, you may only be like 17% of the way there. But here's what happens to a lot of people on those big year goals, right? Like year 9, you're at 65%. And then year 10, you're at 100%. Some of your biggest progress happens in the last parts, right? If you just look at the way businesses grow, look at the way that people grow, look at the way that anything grows. Like a lot of those big bursts of growth happen towards the end, right? Or later on in the progression. And so just understand with yourself, right? Like you may not be on track with your goals, but say, okay, if I can't save, again, let's just use this simple analogy, $50,000 a year, a little over $4,000 a month. Maybe I can't save $4,000 this month, but what am I going to be doing so that by November and by October, I can save $6,000 a month?
Yeah.
Right. What can I do now to sow like some short-term seed to help increase so that I can be where I need to be later in the year?
Yeah, very good. And one of the things I would also encourage people, more people get broken and will stop because they don't know how something's going to happen, and they let how get in the way of what. And what I'll say to you is, you remember we talked about this, the problem-solving mindset, the overcoming mindset is I don't know how, but I have confidence that I can figure it out. And so many people, if they can't see all the steps that are right before them, they're like, well, I guess it's not going to happen. So what I always ask people whenever they're like going, well, I don't know how to do that, I go, let me ask you something. What's the best thing that's happened in your life? For me, it's getting married to my wife. Did that happen how I thought it would be? No chance. I had no idea I was going to meet my wife in England, of all places, and that I was going to marry a foreign chick. If you would have asked me that when I was young, how are you going to marry someone from overseas? I would have probably come up with a story, and it would have been wrong. So I always ask you, if you don't even know how the best things in your life happened, why would you think that you need to know how the next things are going to happen? I mean, that's part of the joy, is that you learn in the process and you become better. And I think as Pastor Keith says, when you become better, so is everything in your life. And that really is, you are the central element in every single thing in your life. So if you set yourself that I'm always going to get better, I'm going to keep getting stronger, that the how is going to reveal itself, and you trust God and say, Lord, direct my steps. Man, when you acknowledge God in all your ways, He will make your path straight, is what it says in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And I love that's a life scripture for me, because it gives me so much confidence. It's not all on you. Praise God.
So let me just say this, right? Like we've talked about 4 reasons that people quit, and we've talked about the 3 keys to finishing. If you will take the time to look down, again, we talked about the prerequisite. You've got to decide, like, hey, these are my goals. I determined in a sober mind, this is what I'm after. This is what I'm going to accomplish, and I'm going to stay after it all year long. And if you'll take these keys, I promise you, this year is not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. You're going to face difficulties. But if you will look at these things every day, if you will look at your goals every day, if you will think about these 3 keys every day, and you say, today I'm going to do everything that I can do to move towards my goals, to move towards my targets. If you will do that for the rest of this year, whether you've got 350 days left in this year or you got 100 days left in this year, whatever you've got left, if you will sit down and you'll be intentional, say, these are the things that I'm going to focus on, these are the keys that I'm going to use to make sure that I finish this year, I promise you will get to the end of this year, and maybe you won't score 100, but what you will hear is well done.